Welcome back to Diabetics Doing Things. Very excited to introduce you to episode 1 of More Than a Diabetic. Today, we are going to be talking with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals from the diabetes online community. Amazing people who not only gave their time, but give up their platforms to lend their voice to people with diabetes of all kinds, but specifically Black people with diabetes for the purposes of today's conversation. Our topic is medical racism, misdiagnosis, and stereotypes. And our 5 guests are Mila Clark Buckley. She's the hangry woman. Chelsea Rice, type 1 comedian. Taylor Johnson, Taylor Beddick. Shaw Struthers, type wonderful. And Dr. Roy Collins, who's Dr.RoyC on Instagram. Our 5 panelists today truly embody being more than a diabetic. And they really dig into these conversations. And I'm very pleased that we were able to facilitate these and lend our platform to it. This episode is about an hour long, pretty in-depth discussion. After this intro, I'm going to play the introductions of each of our guests so that you can hear their voices and you'll be able to recognize their voice throughout. This is a panel, so our panelists will be talking to each other, to you, and to Eritrea and I, who is also here, even though I've been talking about this the entire intro.
No worries, Rob. We know it's a new format. We know it's a little different. We just asked a little bit for your patience and grace, but also this episode is just so good. It's honestly, I told Rob before, I'll say it again now, it is my favorite episode. I'm glad we're opening it up with it. There are so many small tidbits in here, stories that I just know that the people listening to this need to hear. So I can't wait to hear what you guys think about it. And man, just let it play.
Let it play. So if you're listening to this and you find yourself saying, oh, I really wish I could see our participants, I'm having a hard time following who's talking. This is also available on our YouTube channel. So youtube.com/diabetics doing things. So if you are wanting to see the visual experience, it's basically just a Zoom, but we've got it all set up for you on YouTube. So be sure to check that out if you want the full audio
It's a great
visual
medium.
experience.
It's a great medium. If you go watch it, you can see me and Rob's faces, which is hilarious because there are so many moments where our faces just look ridiculous. But it's great to watch it on YouTube, and also you can listen to it on our site and everywhere that you listen to podcasts. So yeah,
absolutely,
no excuse not to do it.
It'll continue to be live on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are hosted. And ultimately, if you just want to hear me be really nervous about saying the right thing, you can really see how much we care, how much time and effort we put into this to make sure that it is representative of the people with diabetes that we are trying to represent and the stories that we're trying to highlight. And it's just me getting out of my comfort zone a little bit. So feel free to give me any critiques about when I'm talking about racism and how my voice kind of cracks a little bit. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm doing the right thing.
I mean, somebody's got to put Rob in check, but anyway.
Yeah, if that's all that comes out of this series, wow, what a victory. All right, that's enough talking from us. I'm going to let our amazing 5 guests introduce themselves. And coming at you is episode 1 of More Than a Diabetic, Medical Racism, Misdiagnosis, and Stereotypes. Welcome back to More Than a Diabetic. I am joined by an amazing panel of people all around me. And today we are going to cover some very exciting topics, mostly centered around misdiagnosis, medical racism, and microaggressions. So to kick off the conversation, I have a stat for you guys, and I'd love to just pick this up, talk about it as a group. The risk of diabetes, here's the stat. The risk of diabetes is 77% higher among African Americans than non-Hispanic white Americans. So certainly we all know this anecdotally just because of stereotypes, but are we as a diabetes community talking enough about the disproportionate assault on Black communities by diabetes?
No.
Absolutely not.
Nope, not at all.
And I'll go even further. We're not talking about things such as sickle cell anemia either. Things that are definitely pertaining to African Americans. We're not dealing with imbalances of proper healthcare and proper attention to Black and brown communities in general, and it's got a long history. So I think it's not just diabetes. It's the full gamut, even as it pertains to any type of health related issue, as it pertains to the Black and brown communities. The Black and brown communities haven't really been spoken to. You can choose whether it's social media or just in mainstream media, just in commercials you see on television. You don't see us included.
Or if we are included, it's almost tokenized. Like it's almost like what these assumptions of us are in like the most extreme manners. And then coupled with like on the other side of that, like not even having just like general representation. Like I think sometimes I'll look at, and I won't like name names, but I think we all know, you know, you look at a certain organization's website or you see kind of like the diabetes organizations that are out there saying like, we're representing people with diabetes, we're representing patients. And then every single person on their website or on their social media is white. And you're kind of like, where am I represented in that? And like, how are you getting information to a community that looks like mine if I'm not even reflected in the materials that you're distributing to people? So it's always really interesting too to hear stats like that that are so staggering, and then come to a realization that like our community knows that, and like that doesn't surprise us, but that would surprise like tons of other people.
And when we talk about disparities, we're talking about differences in outcomes that aren't linked to anything that you would be expected from. So when it comes about prevention and the actual healthcare that Black and brown folks are getting compared to our peers, it's just wildly different. And so that amount of access, that amount of information is why we have different outcomes and why we're unfairly having worse outcomes and living worse lives than the rest of us.
I was gonna say, it's easy to make assumptions about the cause of some of those disparities. But if you look at the data, even if you account for differences in socioeconomic status and income, the outcomes are still staggeringly worse for Black and brown communities than they are for similarly privileged people of other ethnicities and races.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that those differences start very early, because even if you look at kind of the stats with kids with diabetes or just kids with health problems, this starts really, really early. I think people look at us when we talk about it as adults and think your lifestyle choices got you here. And I'm like, that's not true. But also, then how do you explain the same kind of stats coming out about children? Like they haven't lived long enough to make terrible lifestyle choices. So what's the excuse?
We often hear about unconscious bias. It's become almost a buzzword in corporate circles and in workplaces at this point. But what it actually means in my anecdotal experience is that when I talk to young Black patients with diabetes, you know, I'll go out of my way to try to provide them as much information as possible. One thing unfortunately I hear all the time is, I didn't know that, or this is the first time I'm hearing, or I would, you know, wish someone else explained to me as clearly as you're explaining it. So there's that lack of information, that lack of care is what leads to worse outcomes down the line.
Well, I was, you know, and something just popped in my head just now. I don't know if any of you guys saw, there was an ad floating around on Instagram about Masterclass. And Roger Mosley is like the newest instructor on Masterclass now. And he said something in that little commercial that they made for it. It says, if you don't exist in the literature, you don't exist. And and that kind of rings true to what we're talking about right now, is like, when you don't see people of color in the ads, when you don't see people of color represented in the orgs ads, or, you know, you see the JDRF, everybody in ball gowns and tuxedos, but you don't see them out in the community lifting a finger to try and bring these other folks in to the loop. And so it's like, if you don't exist in that whole realm, as far as like what people see, yeah, we don't exist.
Even worse, from a pharmaceutical standpoint, a lot of the studies that are done to try new medications and things that are helpful aren't tried in our populations. They're tried usually for middle-aged white men. That's kind of how it's been historically. And so we're not even 100% sure that all medication, this is not just a diabetes thing, this is kind of across, especially where I am as a psychiatrist, across pharmaceutical classes. So we're not even entirely sure that, you know, what small differences are in our that we have genetically are going to respond the same. And so we need to be represented not just, you know, on social media and in brochures, but also like in the hard science as we try new medications and see what we can do therapeutically.
Medications, behavioral therapies, any kind of change in behavior and things like that were not represented at all. I think I've talked about before eating disorders and diabetes, and just the absolute absence of Black people in that research is, and I mean Hispanic people as well, it's really alarming considering we experience these problems at much greater rates than white people, and no one is addressing how we talk to people about this. What are some of the causes? nothing. We're just absent. I think diabetes is a very particular aesthetic, and it's not us.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And I personally like sometimes find it really interesting when I do get like the outreach and somebody says like, we want to work with you in our campaign for XYZ. And I kind of ask them, well, why? Like what attracted you to me? What is it that I portray? What is it that you're looking for or that you think that I have that you want to put out there? And a lot of the times the response I get is, well, you're a person of color, you're a woman, you don't typically fit the like T1D look and feel, and we just want to put someone different out there. And I'm like, well, while that is noble, like there is more than just me, and I am not the only person that like represents someone with diabetes that fits this mold for you. And like think a little bit deeper about why you want someone who looks like me, and think a little bit deeper about how many more of us are out there that are completely different from each other. And I think like a lot of us always talk about how Black people are not a monolith, and so you can't just approach one of us and think that this one person who looks this way speaks for everybody in the community. And that's also kind of like an issue within representation, because people think like, okay, well, we checked the box, we have this one person, they look this certain way, and we're done. We've checked our checklist, and like now we don't have to do any more. And the conversation never goes any further than that. And it's so unfortunate.
And I'll pick on corporate America for a second here. Diversity, inclusivity, diversity, inclusion, D&I, the terms that we use in corporate America to define what we're talking about, representation, often are just, hey, we need to make sure that there's one Black person in this campaign. And again, sort of seeing it at face value rather than what this person actually brings to the equation.
I don't know. I just don't think people know truly what diversity means, because they've never been called on it and they've never been held accountable to make sure that it happens. And I feel like as a like Black community, we're always talking about like ways that we can be included or ways that we can be seen or have our voices heard and inserted into that conversation based on the merit and value of our voices, not just because of the color of our skin. But then I feel like the conversation has always been uncomfortable, and this year in particular made it even more uncomfortable. Like all of us being at home, seeing more stories of police brutality and people dying, having that moment where people didn't know whether to post a black square and shut up or if they should actually say something. And I feel like, especially now, it's like kind of in our consciousness in a way that is like so obvious, and it's not something that you can just like walk away from. And I think before it was acceptable to check the box. It was acceptable to say, okay, we have one person from each category and we have included them and we have done the work of inclusion. And I think people are realizing now, and especially like diabetes orgs and people who work in diabetes care and even medical professionals, like hearing that the Hippocratic Oath, I think, has like an added line about like racial disparities or like treating people how they should be treated regardless of race. And so like that consciousness is coming up and bubbling up to the surface more and more because it's inescapable. Like if you're not doing the work outside of checking the box, you're not doing the work, and people are starting to pick up on that and call it out. And I think people are facing more backlash for that, not just because they're not doing the right thing, but because they're not doing the right thing genuinely. And like it's no longer at a point where you can just like do nothing and get away with it. It's like people are starting to notice that.
Or even to do the bare minimum, like it doesn't fly anymore. Yeah, it's not enough. It's not enough to have a panel and only have one kind of Black girl on there. Like it's just not good enough. You have to do better.
Yeah.
Ancient African-American proverb, there's levels to this ish. And it's not only bringing me to the table, right? It's also giving me a voice to affect change. And then it's not only giving me that voice, but will you listen to what that voice has to say, right? So we're done with that level one. Okay, we see a Black face there, or we're including this Black person. We want to actually see that person have an ability to make change, bring other people with them, and hear that you're going to be responsive to that change.
I've always wondered who drew the short straw to start sending all the emails out to the Black diabetes advocates. They were just sitting in front of the computer like, okay, oh boy, how do I do this? How do I do this? Oh my God, how did I get here?
Well, or
Here? No,
like,
not
You know
here.
they called their one black friend. Stop it, Chelsea. You know
Yeah,
they
no.
called their one.
And that's usually been me all my life. It's like that's who I was. It's like, well, that's Chelsea. He's not going to punch me in the face.
yeah, I mean, and it's interesting too, because I think people are like trying to come from a noble place with it, like trying to be inclusive. But you know, we saw over, I can't remember when it was, there was like some feature of like, you know, 3 women in the community at some point this year, and the fact that they had enough like sense to feature them and to say, as Juneteenth, it was Juneteenth, I remember this now very clearly. The fact that they said, we can feature these women and we can use their stories to be able to like
Be relevant,
share more and be relevant with the diabetes community and do something for Juneteenth and have relevant content, but they did not have the sense to back them up in the comment section when people said the most absolute racist things to them and about them, and then they turned the comments off. And it was just like, you have to think it through the entire way. Like you have to be able to think like, if I'm going to ask this person to put their self out there and put their like body on the line, essentially, I also need to be there to protect them in some sort of way. And they didn't have to like go and like tell every person in the comments that was saying racist stuff like, you're a racist, get out of here. But they could have said like, this is actually why you're wrong, and here are stats to back it up, here are anecdotes to back it up. We don't like condone this kind of language and don't speak about another community member in this way. Like they had so many opportunities to do that. And I think that's like what I mean by going beyond checking the box. Like, okay, sure, you highlighted 3 Black women for Juneteenth, but then like, what did you do to protect them? What did you do to make sure that their stories were heard in the way that they wanted them? And then like, what did you do to dispel the myths and like actively, I think like we like this has been thrown around all year, but like actively be anti-racist, like tell people what they said was wrong and why it was wrong, and stand up for the people that you used in your features. And I just like, I don't think that like anyone thinks that they have to go that far. And I think there's also some like naive thoughts in that as well, like people just thinking, oh well, people won't be that bad online. And it's like, no, people are their worst online. Like that's the place that you have to do the most to protect against it. And so like, you know, people have noble intentions, but then they don't think about what that backlash might be on the other end of it, and then how it makes the people on the other end of that feel, because that's not a great feeling when you lend your voice to something and then people like trash
rip
it.
you apart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was anybody else in those meetings?
I'm sorry?
Was anybody else in either of those 2 meetings with?
Yeah.
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 That you may as well have dropped a aluminum trash can down this flight of stairs. It's just that whole thing. Even, I mean, the first one was just, I don't even know how to describe it. But the second one was a little bit more disturbing to me, because it seemed like some of that was kind of like they were looking for the non-aggressive Black people that aren't going to just like maybe flip a MacBook in the middle of the conversation or something. They would just want to like, oh, can we tone it down a little bit? Can we get, is there anybody we can get here that's not going to like, you know, choke me online? And it was just, and a lot of time I just kind of sat back and I just kind of just observed. Definitely in the second one, I kind of sat back and looked at the difference between the 2 meetings. And right now, all of you can pretty much, if you weren't even there, you know what the outcome was.
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah. But I think that's what Mila was talking about, is tokenization.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact,
as a whole, that's all it is.
I forgot what day that was. They posted something on Instagram, and it was just like we're just back to square one here. You didn't hear anything we said, and so that's pretty much. I was just like, you know, grab the soap and wash my hands of the whole thing, because I'm like, I'm done. I'm tired. I don't have to explain this anymore, because it was too easy to understand what you haven't been doing and what you just did, which you didn't have to. You could have done better. I mean, and And honestly, I don't get angry about it so much because I do understand that a lot of these folks, they just never understood or never took the time to realize that, you know, Black people are different from white people or Asian people. We are different in many ways. And they just assume that, well, you can just put it out there and everybody will be fine. Nobody's going to, you know, say anything wrong about it. Going to make, you know, but, but just like you said, if everybody gets Facebook strong and just want to say anything they want to. And what did you think? It's like, I just asked, what did you think was going to happen? You know, with the climate of this country right now, you see what's happening every other day. All you have to do is open up social media and see what people are doing. Today, you know, is a perfect example. Supreme Court says no. Now everybody's flipping out, losing their minds. You know, this is where we are. So what did you expect to happen? So it just proves how lost this particular organization and several other organizations are when it comes down to this. You know, I've shaken hands and we'd like to, you know, we hoping you could, okay, cool, let me know. Crickets. But then when everything happens over the summer, it's like, oh yeah, now, okay. And so it's just seriously, it's oftentimes just disingenuous, but at the same time, I get that they just completely clueless. And you just have to sit back and just laugh sometimes. It's like, well, there they go again. Those crazy.
Taylor, I see you have a point to make.
I do. Mila's heard me say this before, but I kind of vehemently disagree with always pitting the sole responsibility on our communities, like flat out racism and anti-Blackness problem, on organizations. They are composed of people. They're composed of people like us. A lot of them have diabetes. We don't take the time as individuals to listen to each other and consider the perspective that Black people have separate experiences. And it's also just a lack of providing context initially, especially on social media, and then doing, like Mila was talking about, with follow through. That whole shenanigans on Juneteenth probably wouldn't have gotten as nasty had somebody thought it through and put in the simple work of doing infographics before. Like, you've got people to do it. This isn't hard information to find about medical racism. I threw something together in a day and sent it to the person Chelsea is talking about we have a meeting with. I was like, I don't understand. Like, you didn't think enough of the community that you were trying to represent to do a little research. It should have been that. But these are decisions that are made by individuals. They don't exist in some weird vacuum. All of us are responsible as part of the community. I mean, Black people, we're not responsible for shutting each other out, but as a whole, members of the community are responsible for that. There are people who are sitting in rooms with each other where everyone is white and being like, oh yeah, dude, this is a good idea. Like, this isn't, orgs, like we say orgs like they're ghosts, and like we can keep yelling at them, but they're not necessarily, that's not going to make them change. It's gonna take people, every single person being like, oh wait, no, that's messed up. Like, we've gotta think a little more, and people don't. We do it occasionally when it's trendy, but not consistently.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like, it comes down to us, like, doing it for each other before so many other people chime in. Like, I think Taylor and I are prime examples of getting, I don't know if I can say shit, but getting a lot of shit online just because of the way we look and the way that we portray ourselves, like, openly and very outspoken. And like, I remember I wrote an article about health disparities in the Black community, specifically with diabetes. And I loved the article. Like, I loved researching it and getting to write it. And an organization that I work with all the time posted it. And it literally wasn't until, like, a lot of y'all went onto their post after people were leaving racist comments and you guys, like, backed me up and defended me. It wasn't until after that somebody from that org posted from their page and said, like, we don't condone these kinds of comments, and, you know, we don't want people to leave these kind of comments, but also here are some stats, like, from the NIH and from government agencies that back up everything that's in this article that she wrote. But it took you guys to be the people to kind of first, like, throw the stones and push back. And that to me, like, and I don't know if a lot of other communities have to do that or have to be as vigilant as we do to be able to say our piece and be outspoken online. But it's so unfortunate. Like, I know every single time that I'm about to post something, I'm always like, okay, what are the 10 ways that someone's going to come at me? Who's going to tell me I need to go on a diet? Who's going to tell me that, like, I represent diabetes terribly? How am I going to respond to that? And at first, like, I would be annoyed by it and like really hurt by it, because I was like, I'm doing the best I can like anyone else. And now I just throw it right back, and like, I don't hold back, because I'm like, if you took the time to leave this publicly, you wanted people to see it. So I want people to see your response right
Run me all the smoke. Run me all that
Yes,
smoke.
like,
all of it.
all the smoke, because like, I'm not going to sit here and like, and be criticized for something that, like, if it was a genuinely, like, I don't know, like a genuinely good criticism of like something that I maybe didn't say or something that I didn't do, I feel like I can accept that. But when it is literally like throwing stones based on being a Black woman with diabetes, then it's kind of like, I stop there, and like, I'm about to read you to the end of the earth, because like, you don't get to sit here and throw criticism that has no basis.
Well, and I think Chelsea, I'm going to steal this down the road. Said people get Facebook strong, they get their Twitter fingers going, and they, you know, say things that are just flat out wrong, and they're, you know, and also racist, or, and like, yeah, please publish publicly a racist sentiment on my page. I, you know, that, like, congratulations, you played yourself. But I do want to focus on the community aspect, because I think that's something that this year I've also seen more on the front line, so to speak, less like kind of behind the scenes. And I want to ask you guys, and I want to start with Shaw, because I think with your 26 years, you said earlier, living with type 1, most of your life, I imagine each of you, though, experienced isolation as a Black person with diabetes. And I want to know what it means to you guys each personally to be able to have a community linked together by the internet of other Black people with diabetes, and like what that community is like for you and others.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed in '94. I met my first other Black person with type 1 diabetes the summer of '95 at diabetes summer camp. And then I didn't meet another one until like 20. Yeah, so it was super, super isolating. And I'll say that, you know, meeting folks like the folks that are on this call tonight has been fantastic, has been awesome. I am appreciative and thankful that online communities like Facebook and Instagram, while they can harbor lots of horrible, can also help support lots of goodness. And that's fantastic, because yeah, there's like a slim to no chance that I would have ever met any of these people in life or through work or social groups or anything else, had it not been for, you know, some of these platforms. So yeah, that's the best part. I will agree. I'm gonna take it back real quick, because something that both Taylor and Mila mentioned earlier about the organizations. Yes, they are made up of people, and it's one of those things where it's like complaining about what Congress is doing. Like, you can complain all day about what Congress is doing, but until you actually call your specific congressperson or senator and write and email, like, you're not doing anything productive. So like, these organizations that are claimed to represent us, and the companies that make products for us at the same time, like, they're made of people, and there are specific people who are in charge of PR and communications and designing the pamphlets that go out and everything else. And until, you know, you start calling those specific people out, like, good for us. We know who the president of, you know, certain diabetes-led or diabetes research organizations are. We know how to find them with some relative ease. We can call them out on things and be like, hey, you this is not how y'all should have handled this thing. What are you going to do next time to do this better? But the challenge with that is people are lazy, and it's super easy to just toss something into the internet and wipe your hands of it and assume that it'll be fine. Like, doing the work to actually think about how something can affect the people that you're, supposedly trying to support, and do the work to prepare the background research or analytics and things that you actually probably already have on hand and you're using for other purposes. Taking the time to do that takes some work. And it's unfortunate, it's sad that it doesn't seem like it's worth the effort for the people that are part of your community or the community that you claim to represent.
I want to talk about this because I think the personification of organizations and the relationships that we all have individually with whether it's chapters, whether it's diabetes or not, like the people behind companies, organizations, what have you. I have this management principle that I abide by, that most people don't do a bad job on purpose. And that most people, when they leave their house, or when they used to leave their house, when they log onto their computer during the day, they want to do a good job, because that's just sort of how people are wired. Where they really get sideways is when they are asked to do something that they have no idea how to even start doing, and they occasionally get analysis paralysis. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm absolving these people of the hard work like you're talking about, because I think all the information, and I think Taylor is, will just retweet it forever and ever. Like, the information is out there. You can, within a few Google searches, get all the information that you need as an individual. You don't have to have a Black friend that can point you in the right direction. Google can just be that for you. And so I think, when I talk to these organizations, when I go to these rooms because I've been in rooms with diabetes where all the people are white, and it's just really clear that nobody else notices. Like, it's that's a normal thing, a normal everyday occurrence for the people in those rooms making those decisions, because their lives are homogenous. They hang out with the same people groups at work, at the country club, in the neighborhood, at the HOA, wherever, and they don't see a difference.
Case in point, white people didn't even know what Juneteenth was until 2020, which will always tickle me.
True.
Wow.
Yeah, they're like, it was mind blowing. People were going crazy. Like, wow, did you guys know that the news took this long to travel? It's like,
I
Don't
think
even
that
mention
with
National Black Anthem. It's like, the what? Where did they get off making that up this right now?
Amanda Seals had to tell us about the Black Anthem, y'all, really. But I think that, okay, so with us talking about organizations and just the racism that we experience as an online community with diabetes, I think that the intention of the white people isn't bad, but the impact is so evil if you think about it on a larger scale, because what we're really here to talk about is medical racism, and people die because of some of these decisions. So something that Taylor was saying was like, these are individual people who do this. That is the same in the medical community. So it's the same, it's literally the same action. It's just a different level of impact. Like, it impacts us, yes, when an organization does it, but when a pregnant Black woman is telling a doctor that something's wrong and the doctor doesn't believe her because she's Black, now it's this whole other nefarious thing. So the stakes are much higher. So when we think about racial misdiagnosis and things like that, especially some of the people in this group have been through that. I know Taylor and Mila specifically. Let's dive into that. I want to talk about that.
and even like above that, like outside of diabetes, maternal mortality in Black mothers is 3 times higher than white mothers. Like, right. Like, don't even have to Google anything else after that. That's enough of a starting place. So let's hear about it. Misdiagnosis, like face value, a Black woman, slightly overweight, walks into an endocrinologist's office or a primary care with diabetes symptoms, and the diagnosis is almost always
Type 2 diabetes.
Walk it back. I was a child.
Yeah.
I was a child. I was a not overweight child.
It's fascinating, like, how that can happen and how it can happen so often. Because like, I genuinely, and this probably comes from just like a place of, again, being kind of naive, but I was like, man, like, I've never really heard this happen to other people. And then I told a few of my friends in the DOC, and namely like connected with one of them who she was like just getting over like a year of going through it. And other friends who told me, I heard your story and to me it doesn't sound like type 2. And other people who said, I really think you should get a GAD antibody test. I think you should ask for it. And I just said, no, like my doctor's telling me I have type 2. I have a family history of gestational and type 2. Like it makes sense to me. I look like I have type 2. I probably have type 2. And like it wasn't until just getting to a point of being like endlessly frustrated and restricting my food to a point where like I wasn't eating because I was like, this is the only way to get my blood sugar down, or like not knowing, having like fatigue of taking insulin, being like, I keep gaining weight every time I take insulin, so I shouldn't take it because I know it's going to help my blood sugar, but it's going to like mess up my insulin resistance, and having like all of these really terrible thoughts. And then finally like getting to a point where I was so exhausted from asking my doctor over and over and over, can you test me for GAD? Like I was diagnosed when I was 26, type 2, just like, I don't think it makes sense for me. And I feel like you ignored my symptoms and looked at other symptoms in favor of the ones that you ignored, and getting the no over and over and over and being like, well, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, like my doctor knows better than me. But then finally going to like, it took me going to a Black woman doctor who got to a point where like we had gotten my A1C to like 6.5 and like it was good. And then 3 months later it shot up to 10. And she was like, I really don't know what else to do, because like I don't want to put you on more medication. I don't want you to like suffer. Like I don't want you to have high blood sugars anymore. And she was like, I'm a great doctor for your primary care, but I think you need to go to an endocrinologist. And it took her being like literally having the humility to be like, we've done all we can do here. Like, let's send you to someone who just knows more, because we'll find out more. Like if you do have type 2, we'll just know how to proceed a little bit better. But if you don't, she was kind of like, I don't really know the answer, so like I don't want to tell you what to do. But going to the endocrinologist then, who was like also a person of color, instead of asking me, what did you eat, what, like looking at my chart and looking at how much I weigh, or saying like, okay, what are you not doing, he literally sat down and like looked me in the eye and said, tell me about your diagnosis, and I want to know how you went from 6.5 to 10%. And I want to know kind of like, what are your thoughts on it? And he didn't assume anything. He asked me point blank, like, I want to know what you think. And then at the end of that conversation, for him to say, okay, let's test you for GAD because I think you have LADA. Have you ever heard of LADA? Let me explain it to you, which was like something that nobody ever did, was explain, this is type 2 diabetes and this is what causes it and this is what happens and this is how like your body reacts to the medications you take, and here are the medications you're taking and why. Like I never got the whys behind anything. So then like a few years later, to finally be tested and finally have it confirmed that I was doing everything I could and it wasn't working because I didn't have the right diagnosis, and that I potentially like spared myself from DKA or going to the ER or having a hospital stay because I didn't have any insulin in my body at some kind of point. Like if I would have gone on this long, you know, or longer, it could have been worse. Like the outcome could have been totally worse. Or like I'm of like childbearing age, I want to have kids. And so if I were to have gotten pregnant in that time, like I could have had terrible complications in pregnancy.
Oh my God.
Like there's just so many factors and like so many things. And it all came from assumptions. Like it didn't come from my doctor initially actually listening to me. It came from like, oh yeah, I see a patient just like you every single day. They all have type 2. You look exactly like that. And so here's a bunch of medication. Learn to take insulin and I'll see you back in 3 months. And like not even having a conversation about what to do next. And like now knowing that like that's not unique, like that happens to so many people of color, it like frustrates me to no end, because I think of like all the times where I was like blamed for my diabetes, or I was told like you're doing just like such a bad job of taking care of yourself, when like I couldn't have done anything different. And I'm sure there's so many people in that boat who feel like they're doing everything that they can and then they have no lifeline or no help. And I am only lucky, like that's it. It's just luck that I had a doctor who was good enough to say, I can't help anymore. And like, we need to take you to somewhere better so we can get more answers. And like, if I hadn't had her, I probably would have just had a doctor who said like, okay, we're going to keep you on these type 2 medications, or we're going to up those dosages and give you more because it doesn't seem like it's bringing your blood sugar down, and we're not going to like ask any more questions or seek anything else because clearly you're not doing, like, I think people with type 2 are always labeled as like, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, or you're not trying hard enough.
Non-compliant.
Yeah, and the conversation stops right there, and that's the only conversation, and it's never like, tell me about what you think is going on and like how else can we help you, or what else can we do, and it's always on the patient to like prove I'm not just lazy, like I'm really trying here. So, and it's detrimental. Like, I think, you know, that's why you see that like rise in the number of complications, or people who are, you know, or like the question sometimes isn't asked like, what access to resources do you have? Who do you have in your life that can kind of like help you navigate this? You're kind of just left to figure it out. And I'm like a pretty persistent person, but most people are not. And so if you take what is given to you at face value, like you would never seek out anything else. And that's like a huge detriment to your health and your life.
Yeah. So like, again, that's a doctor being super lazy. Like they didn't take the time to do the work and actually make a credible diagnosis. They were like, close enough. Type 2, right? Like we don't accept that level of performance for lots of other jobs. Like if you're a pilot, you can't just like point the plane kind of westward and be like, yeah, we'll get to LA. You actually have to like point it directly to the place that we're supposed to go and actually land it in order to be considered, you know, that was a good job. So I mean, like we're glad that you had that other PCP that was, you know, diligent enough to recognize, hey, I don't know everything that is going on here, and I think you should get, you know, some more expert advice.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's an assumption too of authority figures that, of course, they have my best interest in mind. Of course, they thought of this thing. I'm not a doctor. I think you said that a couple of times, Mila. Like, I'm not a doctor. I'm supposed to trust my doctor that they know what's best for me, or they're, you know, looking and leaving no stone unturned, so to speak. Taylor, for
something that Mila said was really interesting to me. She said that, you know, that doctor saw patients like her all the time. But for somebody like Taylor, and I'm really interested to hear hers, when you're a child with diabetes, it's a lot of white kids. So for a doctor to not see a Black child all the time and to still be like type 2, like
immediately. So I was diagnosed at 15. I was a cheerleader. I worked out with the basketball team. I was super in shape the whole 9. So like and by the time I was diagnosed, I had lost so much weight, my pants were literally falling off, and like teachers were concerned. Went to the doctor and she was like, oh, with your family history, it's got to be type 2. It's really interesting to hear Mila say that she got insulin. I did not get insulin for a year in almost. I had to fight to get insulin. And when I finally got insulin, I was told if you would just eat less and worked out more, you would need insulin. You're getting insulin for something you can control with diet and exercise. My diagnosis didn't actually change to type 1 until I was in college, until like I left to go to college. So almost 3 years later. My pediatric endocrinologist was awful. I used to cry every time I went in because the very first thing would be step on the scale. You gained 5 pounds since you were here last. What the F are you doing? And that was basically the extent of my appointments. And that went on for a really long time. And like, no matter what I did, I could not get my numbers down. Like, obviously now I know why, but at the time it was just like, it wouldn't work. And when I finally got insulin, I got Lantus, which I now know I don't react well to. It just doesn't work for me. So yeah, I sat with my A1C at like a 10, 12 for almost 2 years. The focus of my like whole pediatric healthcare was my weight. It was my weight. It was, you need to be thinner. And I mean, I'm sitting, so obviously you can't tell it, but my grandmothers both have like 10 kids. They're very like sturdy women. I'm fairly sturdy. Like it's just kind of how I'm built. There is no there is no dieting away like the shape of my body. And that is what she wanted. I didn't actually get decent diabetes care until I was 25. And it's interesting that Mila mentioned getting pregnant, because around 20, I was in a relationship. I thought it might get serious. And I knew I didn't want to have kids before 30, but I was like, we've got to get what's going on with my body under control. That was at 25 was the first time I had walked into a doctor's office to talk about diabetes, and someone didn't yell at me about my weight. She was just like, we need to figure out what's going on with your insulin, because you're not getting enough. Like something is wrong with your ratios. Like this isn't a you problem. But before that, it was, you have to be sneaking food. That was a assumption my endo made a lot when I was a kid, was that I was sneaking food. I wasn't sticking to my dietitian's plan. I wasn't exercising. Just all kinds of wild things that if she had ever had a conversation with me and like my mom, she would have learned very quickly that it wasn't true. But it didn't occur to her to take the time. Or an insulin pump. Looking back now, a pump would have been really nice. But again, it was one of those things that was kind of held over my head. And it was like, if you get a pump, you failed. If you get a pump, it's because you suck.
Those tidbits are interesting too. Like using medication as a threat. Like, I feel like that was the first conversation I ever had with my doctor. He said, if I have to put you on insulin, it means that you are ruining your life. Like you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so I was so resistant to it at first. And now knowing that the insulin, same thing as you, Taylor, I was using like Humulin 70/30, which sucks. Horrible to have to like plan your day around your insulin for every meal, every exercise, everything. But, and that was my first experience with insulin. So I was like, oh, hell no. Like, I'm not taking this. I'm not using this. Like, this doesn't help. But like having those threats held over your head, like if you have to use insulin, it means you're a bad diabetic. If you have to take this oral medication, it means that you're not taking care of yourself well enough and you're having to use this as a crutch to make you better. And it's like, those are just tools, and we all have different bodies. And like, if our bodies require these certain tools, it doesn't mean we're any less good or bad as a patient. It just means our bodies need the help that it needs. And like, nobody ever tells you that. And so you get like kind of scarred a little bit. And there's like that little bit of like, I don't know, like, I hate to even compare it to this, but like a little PTSD, I think.
It's a real trauma.
Yeah.
It's traumatic. I mean, even now, like I've talked about this before, like it's weird to talk about diabetes things and not have like a visible insulin pump or something like that, because I always feel like I have to prove that I'm type 1 enough, because clearly I don't look it, right? My doctor didn't think I looked it. I've shown up to the other like diabetes events and people assume that I'm type 2. So I'm like, no, you've got to like do all the things to signify. So it is traumatic, and it kind of never ends. And it also it takes a real toll on your physical and your mental health.
Well, I want to talk about this for a quick second, because something that going back and looking back at my experience with diabetes, and Eritrea can tell most of this as well, I think, because Children's Medical Center in Dallas is like a top 5 pediatric endocrine hospital in the world. So I think there's first that layer. But walking back through key moments in my life and thinking about reversing changing my race to Black, would this language and encouragement been used the same way it was given to me at diagnosis? Because those first 15 minutes of your life with diabetes are, I believe now, after interviewing like 300 people, some of the most important moments in your entire life. How your relationship with diabetes is set up from the get-go informs at least the next 3 years, if not more, of your life. And so for me, I got like, everything in your life is within reach. Everything you want is within reach. Just take care of your diabetes. So I'd love to talk to Dr. Roy really quick about bedside manner there, because I question now whether that conversation happens the same way if I'm Black.
Yeah. So, in my training, I obviously take a lot of special interest in talking to diabetics. It's not even my specialty. I'm in psychiatry, but like certainly throughout all my pre-medical training and in medical school, a lot of time shadowing and being directly involved with endocrine care. And if I were to sort of like crudely, based off my experience, kind of place diabetics into 3 categories based off your care, there's like the one tier where, that's the non-compliant tier, right? That's the tier where we just sort of rudimentarily, see what your weight is, do a quick kind of insulin calculation based off of that, and maybe we give you normal insulin, that Humulin 70/30. Maybe we just give you Lantus and just kind of say, good luck, right? Like, you're not bringing blood sugars in, your A1C's crazy, and we're just trying to not even prevent DKA, just limit DKA, right? Then there's that sort of middle tier where there's a little more interaction. You're still sort of doing simple things, but you're bringing in blood sugars. We're kind of making corrections as you go, but it's still not kind of as ideal as it can be. And then there's like that last tier where, right, we're looking at every, we're getting CGM printouts. We're sort of doing a lot of micro changes. We're thinking about augmenting changes. We're thinking very closely about pump versus non-pump, and Similan, and even like SGLT2 and everything like that, right? And so where I feel like that unconscious bias we talked about early on can fit is sort of where in those three tiers you become, right? So for me, even though I am Black, my mom's a pediatrician, and she just doesn't play that. So from the moment I was diagnosed, I was on the pump right away. I got the best care. Shout out to Texas Children's Medical Center. I knew that everything was going to be okay. But when I was in my kind of early 20s, right, I'm fairly well educated. I'm not yet a doctor, but I know what's going on, and I'm sort of up to my own care. That it sort of fell off a bit. And I remember having a really conversation with a physician that really kind of spoke to me, right? My A1C, I think at that point in my early 20s, was like in the high 7s, low 8s. And I was actually in urgent care for something non-related, but we were just sort of talking about my A1C. You asked me for my history, and I told him everything that I had going on and what my A1C was. And he was just kind of like, and this is a white guy, he was like, it's a little racist that you haven't been held more accountable. And I hadn't really thought about it like that, because up to that point, like, I had all the support that I needed. But once I'm on my own, and I don't, you don't really know who I am when I just walk into an urgent center, as my insurance kind of all through, before what it is now. And it really showed that, like, even though I've had privilege in different parts of my life, like, I can't shed the skin that I have. And so if you see someone like me with an A1C that's not too bad, but also could be a lot better, right? Like, what tier are you putting me in, right? Because I should be in that last tier, but if you're only putting me in that second tier, now I'm losing out, and I'm having different outcomes than probably someone who didn't look like me but had the same background as me. So I feel like that's sort of where the different biases come in, and that's what we can do to sort of train providers better.
So his argument, or his point was, if you were white, they would be holding you more accountable for your higher A1C.
It's all about benefit of the doubt. It's all about that sort of relationship that we call therapeutic alliance on this side of things, right? So are you able to form that therapeutic alliance? Are you able to hold your patients accountable and provide all the different levels of support, right? Doctors are humans too. And so we kind of go into every patient interaction, with our own set of biases, our own expectations, our own obviously busy workload. How much of our time are we going to give to each case? If I already have these preconceived notions about who you are, maybe I give you, I don't do a bad job, although you guys definitely, they did a bad job. There's no doubt about it. But you try to do the best you can. But if your expectations are lower than they should be, you're just going to do worse. Like, that's, again, everyone's a human involved here. And so what we need to try to figure out, from the side of the provider to the patient, is how we can strengthen that therapeutic alliance so that people don't get mischaracterized.
So my situation was very similar to Roy. My dad is a physician, and he diagnosed me. So he noticed the signs, he checked my blood sugar, he took me to the ER where I got the official diagnosis, but he diagnosed me. So I didn't have to worry about the misdiagnosis that I guess I could have gotten had he not caught it himself. But the first thing he said, I don't remember who my official doctor was at my diagnosis or anything that they said, to be honest. But what I remember him telling me was that this is your responsibility. Yes, you will have doctors, but don't expect them to give you the best care. It's your responsibility. So ask all the questions you need to understand what you need to understand. If they're not telling you what you're asking for, then find somebody else and be your own advocate. So that is what I have done for the last 26 years. I have been very fortunate to have some really high quality endos, but at the same time, I've done everything I could to learn as much as I can on my own, so that when I go into my appointments, I'm asking them questions that I know they're probably not going to ask me. or I'm giving them information that they may not take the time to ask about, so that they know that, oh, I'm in that last tier. Like this is person who's going to be actively involved in doing whatever they can do to make sure they're in the best possible, they're having the best possible outcomes. I can't take for granted that they're not going to do whatever. And if I don't know what I'm talking about, or if I'm not talking to them about the things that are going to be most impactful in their treatment, they're going to call me. This person's going to call me on it. And I've had to call some folks out, like, hey, what's up with these new CGMs, or what's up with this pump? You guys you didn't talk to me about this. Like, what's the deal? And they've been, oh yeah, you're right. These are the options. And unfortunately, like you shouldn't have to do that. I agree. You should be able to trust that your physician, your healthcare providers are going to provide you everyone the best possible care. But like you said, right, doctors are people too, and they're just trying. They've got a huge workload, and they're trying to get as many people through as they can and provide them the best possible care. And so, yeah, some people will take some shortcuts there.
And I'm gonna give up the game a little bit too, real quick. Sorry to cut you off.
No,
but,
go ahead.
Especially as we talk about type 1 diabetics, like growing up and becoming adults or even being diagnosed as adults, they're just, that's just a place where the healthcare lacks knowledge, obviously. Like, so if you're going to a pediatric hospital, pediatrician, I mean, that's sort of, definitely built into the training. They're well aimed to handle that. But, adult emergency departments, adult, internal medicine residents that are on the service. I mean, a lot less training on that front. And so like us as diabetics just plain know more in a lot of cases. Like obviously there are, a lot of things that the doctors will know more about, but if we're talking about, how to work an individual pump, all the different sort of nuances when it comes to basals and everything like that, that's lacking there. So, it's really important in the day of social media to make sure that, we as diabetics sort of know what's going on, and we can kind of bring that then to our adult providers. But, it's something that's very important. It's something that I don't think is talked about a lot, because we think about, it used to be called juvenile diabetes, for Christ's sake. So, even though we've now realized that, okay, like this is a disease that affects a lot wider range of ages of folk, that there's still a discrepancy in the training.
I think that it's interesting when we talk, like, especially for you, Shaw, and for you, Dr. Collins, that you come from a background that is a bit more privileged than the average Black person diabetic. So and when we talk more about like, hey, the diabetic themselves owning it and doing that research and getting that information, like Shaw said, it's not the responsibility of the patient. And I wonder if when Chelsea was diagnosed about 30 years ago, it wasn't as easy to access that information. So if Chelsea can tell us a little bit more about how his diagnosis was, and maybe if there was any racial, just like not paying attention to him that came from it, because we know that those resources of the internet weren't available back then like that.
Because I was, let me take you back a little while.
Take us back.
I think the year was 1988, 89. I was diagnosed by a urologist because I was going to the bathroom just all the time, and my roommate literally went behind my back and set up an appointment with a urologist for me because he didn't know what was going on. And so went to the urologist, got diagnosed, was in the hospital for like a week. I was literally in the hospital, at the hospital that I actually worked in at the time. I had health insurance, which, back, I'm not talking like the dark ages, but compared to, today, that said a lot, that I actually had, full health care. And that helped me, get the proper treatment. Now, at the time, I think I was in the hospital for like a week. I started out on insulin. I think I run the gamut as far as the insulins that I work with. I started out on the 70-30s. Like you said, it was crap. Fast forward, I was on Lantus. I've done the Novolog, Humalog, Clear, Cloudy, whatever you got, pens, and eventually the pump. But at the time of my diagnosis, I had access to healthcare, going to mostly primary care doctors. And I didn't really know that much about endocrinologists at that time, but nobody really brought it up. So I didn't really, it took me many years of doing the best I can with very little resources, because obviously we didn't have the internet at the time. Any support group was a face-to-face support group, and oftentimes I was the youngest one in there. You know, when I walked into one, it looked like I walked into a bingo, room, because everybody there was like in their 60s and 70s. And so, and here I was 25, 26 years old. And so, fast forward to when I eventually lived in Atlanta for many years, and I developed diabetic retinopathy. I had blood leaks in both eyes. I had vitrectomies in both eyes. The vision in my right eye right now is gone. And that was around the early 2000s when that happened. And at the time when it happened, I didn't have decent healthcare. I had to just drive around with blood in my eye for like a year before I actually got a job to where I could have the surgery to get it fixed. And then after that one was fixed, then the other one went. So, and this was around, like I said, the early 2000s. There was Facebook was still obviously being worked on at the time. And it wasn't until around 2008, I think, 2009 maybe, is when I actually discovered that there were other people with diabetes on social media, whether I came across somebody on MySpace before I actually started transitioning to Facebook. And I just met all these other people that had it, that were talking about it. Because prior to that, nobody talked about it. Now you got to understand, the time when I was diagnosed, I didn't know anybody that had diabetes, or at least nobody told me that they had diabetes. So I had nothing to really bounce ideas off, to learn anything. Everything that I had was, in these pamphlets that they gave me when I was in the hospital. So now, prior to that, I had gotten my pump for the first time around 2005. Prior to that, the insurance companies would practically hang up on you when you even talked about a pump. And the doctors rarely even brought it up when you went to see your doctor. Because I think, and in hindsight, I'm thinking, well, he probably couldn't afford it or anything, which is true. At the time, I couldn't afford it because obviously the insurance company wasn't going to pay for it. So now, as it pertains to whether I think whether the doctors were racist in their approach to treating me, here's the golden nugget about racist attitudes. You got to prove it. The minute you call somebody racist, what are they going to say? No, I'm not. So there's your stalemate. You can't prove somebody's thought process. And oftentimes, even if people do something racist, whether they're black, white, whatever, they oftentimes don't even realize it. They don't take into consideration how that other people feels or anything of that nature. So racism is a hard thing to have to prove. Just because somebody used an N-word to my face doesn't necessarily mean that they even realize they're being racist. I can call them on it, but they can still come back and say, well, no, I'm not. So I don't know what these doctors' mindsets were. My thing is, once I found the online community and found that support, I became, more of an advocate for myself. And I started being more diligent in my care and holding these doctors responsible. I've had doctors that, that will sit down and, we'll have an appointment, and I'll sit there and talk to the guy for half an hour, just about either a little bit of everything. When I started advocating, I'd sit and have a talk about 45 minutes with my endocrinologist about, advocating. And then I had another doctor, he would sit there and just stare at his computer the whole time I'm talking to him. And eventually I was like, you know what, let me just make an appointment with your nurse practitioner, because she's actually talking to me right now. So you go in and go play Minesweeper or whatever the hell it is you're doing on that computer over there. And so it was a long road, I guess you could say, to where I am now, to where I have no qualms about speaking up about the things that I'm seeing in the diabetes online community, or just in general, as it pertains to race and the connection with diabetes. Because I was out, I was out in the wilderness at one point, but now, I can safely say that I have a different mindset now, and I have a different attitude with dealing with things like this. I have no problem. I don't bite my tongue about it because I don't see it. I have to.
I think we all know that.
That's the whole problem is these folks online that are actually just ignoring us. That's what they want us to do. They want us to just stay quiet, be passive, and just go along just so they can not feel bad about themselves. Well, guess what? I'm gonna make you feel bad about yourself. If I gotta make you cry, I'm gonna do it. That's it is what it is.
I feel that.
And if these doctors, if they want to, jump strong, well, guess what? If you're pressured down that you can't see X amount of patients and all this kind of stuff, and you bog down, it's a whole lot of work. Well, guess what? You knew the damn job was dangerous when you took it. Okay, I mean, I got all the respect for healthcare workers, but don't come at me with my one eye and tell me that it's hard for you. But I got some stories for you. And that's just the way I roll. And so the diabetes online community in general, I think really saved me because it actually gave me the ability to speak out, to take better care of myself, to actually now I've gotten my education that I should have gotten 30 years ago. Now, because that stuff wasn't available back then. I would have had to go into the library or something and just, roll the dice and meet somebody with diabetes, or find a doctor that's willing to sit down and talk to me. But like I said, as far as any racial disparities I may have experienced, I don't know. I really don't know. And even to this day, I don't know what people are thinking when they're talking with me, but I take pride in the fact that you may not be listening to me, but you're going to hear me. And I can leave if you don't want to hear it, but that's fine. It'll be taken care of. And I think that's one of the things that we as the Black and Brown community need to do. We need to, guess in a sense, huddle our masses and start building on our own and building our own. Because every one of us has been reached out to all summer, and that's all well and good. But you also notice a lot of that just kind of went down the drain. It just weaned off, and you see where that went. So now here we are again. So now it's time that we start building our own platforms and start reaching out to these communities, the folks that aren't able to get on Zoom like us right now, the folks right down the corner from you that may be living with diabetes and that may not have the access, even though they don't realize that they have the world in their pocket on their phone, because all of that is right there.
And that's something that I think I've mentioned before, sort of keeps me up at night. That's the phrase that I use, is that the JDRF statistics about the number of people in the United States with type 1 diabetes, 1.6 million. There are not 1.6 million people with diabetes on Instagram. There just aren't, flat out. Maybe not even like throughout the world even. So that global population is much, much higher. You look at even the largest diabetes accounts online are not in the triple digit or the 6-figure range, right? So let's just say a theory that I have is that there are 100,000 connected people with diabetes on Instagram. So even if all those people were in the United States and they are not, that would be less than 10% of the total population. So how do we reach those people? And I think, the representation aspect is a big part of that as well. How many people are opting out because they don't see themselves? And I think we earlier talked about tokenism. I also want to focus a little bit on stereotyping of Black people in media as either very poor and sort of destitute, or very successful as athletes or entertainers, and sort of the middle class totally underrepresented in mass media. What about, in the diabetes community, just Black people that are just normal in like Black people working and living in the US?
I love this. I'm excited for you guys to talk on the subject of the magical Negro not existing. Like, somebody, please.
Oh yeah, I mean that whole the whole, like you said, the magical Negro syndrome that we have in this country that's been shoved down our throats through mainstream media, whether it be the movies, television. There's something so comforting about a Black person. You know, why do you think that it took this long to get that bandana off Aunt Jemima's head, to get her off the box? Why do you think it took so long? You know, when they actually, they just took Aunt Jemima off the box completely. But prior to that, you notice she didn't have that bandana on her head, right? Like she originally did back in the day. You know, when they took that bandana off in the 80s, they took that off. It took them all the way to the 80s to get that off her head. Now it took it this long to get her off the box.
Yeah, so we all know Aunt Mammy make the best food. So
exactly. Ain't nobody made cream of wheat like that black man on that box right there. Okay, because there's nothing more. This is what we do. This is you go back to back in the 50s when Hattie McDaniel was playing Beulah. You look. It's Norman Lear changed television, but you know, his portrayal of Good Times, that was entertaining to see black folks shucking and jiving, scratching and surviving, moving on up to the east side. That was comforting. It's like macaroni and cheese and cornbread on Sunday morning, you know, Sunday afternoon. Right? It is. I mean, it is what it is, and this is what it is. This is what this country is about.
So, are you saying it's mammy syndrome? Is that what you're trying to tell me right now?
We love a mammy.
You can call it Hope syndrome.
We love comfortable black people. We
call
love
it Bagger Vance syndrome. Bring me a comfortable Negro so I can have it around me to make me feel better about myself.
And so I don't feel uncomfortable or scared. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like you think about think about the portrayal of like an Aunt Jemima, and then you think of like, let's call it a modern times, Meg the Stallion, who is like powerful, throws her body out there, like does not care what people think, and people are afraid of her.
People hate her
because she is so like outspoken. And you could, I mean, obviously you couldn't like never put that on a pancake box or a syrup bottle.
It's the same thing with Dave Chappelle.
But like it's that docile, like, oh, it's not somebody who will talk back to me or make me think or make me like reaffirm my ideas about people and the world. It's like, I just want to see the safe thing that isn't going to make me question anything about my comfortable bubble. And like,
this is why when folks make these comments like they did on Juneteenth on their little Instagram, that is why, because you push their buttons. Wait a minute, where do you get up standing up for yourself like that? See, this is the first thing, and the next thing that comes along is when we decide to start creating our own, making our own.
And that's what I was going to ask you about, because Taylor does that a lot. So do they come for you, girl?
Constantly, but I'm also too dark. So there's also that, like Mila was talking earlier about a lot of the nonsense she gets, but it's because I'm not, if I was smaller, if I was brighter, if my hair was straighter, if I was any bit closer to whiteness, I wouldn't get the nonsense that I get on Instagram.
I agree, because I don't get any of it.
And
and we say a lot of the same stuff sometimes.
We talk about that a lot. Taylor and I, we have sat together on Instagram and or called each other and FaceTime for an hour and been like, how is it that I say this and then you say this and no one says anything to you? And it's because I'm a consumable, light-skinned Black person. And I hate to take up spaces that people like Taylor, people like Mila should be in, because I don't want it. Like, it's not right. And I don't want to make white people feel comfortable, especially with this mouth on me. I usually don't make them comfortable anyway.
Well, that's true. But I think
Rob knows.
Yeah, I use you as a weapon, frankly. But it really like came to me like when I was, I think, in high school, and there was this cut scene in Family Guy. I'm like outing myself as a person who used to watch Family Guy, which is just terribly embarrassing.
Disgusting.
But they cut away and it was like the Allstate guy. And it was like, Allstate, competitive rates, non-threatening Black spokesman. Are you in good hands? And I was just like, whoa, and like flipped my eye upside down smile emoji. I was like, oh, that's what it is. Like, he's Black, but he's not too Black that white people are going to be put off by him. And he's got that voice. He's
Morgan Freeman.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
and then like you see like the commercials, like Jake from State Farm, like Jake from State Farm is in your house. You're giving Jake from State Farm like free cuts of meat because he gave you a better deal on your car insurance, but you don't see the Allstate guy like sitting in people's homes. You see him.
Jake from State Farm is Black now.
Yeah, he is.
He still wears khakis though. He still wears khakis.
So
He's a
like,
lame. He's a
the
lame.
commercials are so like, it's hilarious to me because like you see all of the other commercials and they're so like daunting, and then you have just like this cute light-skinned black guy that's like, I'm Jake from State Farm, let me save you some money, and like everyone's like, cool, come into my house, like let's do this, like let's play basketball with my son, and it's like, what? Like it's just like so interesting, and I think we all see that, but like I mean my husband's white and he'll like watch that commercial and he's like, that's cute, like I love that, and I'm like, well, I have like several problems with this and here are all of them. And then he's like, oh okay, I get it. And it's, you know, it's the same bubble. It's like there are things that I point out to him or expose to him that he's like, oh, I never even understood that or saw that, or and that's just kind of where some people are, which is really sad. But they also go into like attack mode when you
there are three TV shows that I'm old enough, Chelsea probably remembers, I'm old enough to remember watching as a kid that were excellent representations of Black people and families in media. There was A Different World.
Oh yeah.
Living Single, and The Cosby Show. Now,
the Cosby Show.
It still stands for the time.
No,
like for the time it stands.
But it's not relatable. None of us had a daddy doctor and a lawyer mama. Like, sorry, not all of us. Dr. Roy. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
because
me neither. But it was a.
Let you make your point. Go ahead.
It was a respectable family with a mother and a father and some kids that were not acting a fool most of the time, that were like operating in good standing. And then, you know, Living Single, again, some young Black professionals doing well on their own, and it was good enough to copy and make friends, right? And then, you know,
talk about it.
Say it.
You know what I'm saying? And then
they ain't listening.
Yeah, A Different World, again, young Black people in college getting a higher education, like doing well for themselves, and yeah, they just don't make shows like that anymore. And
how you say that, but I Raise You, Everybody Hates Chris.
I wanna like, I'm 32, so I'm like in the middle. I want to say, like, the conversation that I've had with my brother and sister recently, within the last like 2 years, we talked about the influence of Black media's presence in our house through two Disney Channel shows specifically. Number one, the famous Jet Jackson, which we stan all day. And number two, Smart Guy, TJ Henderson, you know, a single dad, Black character, single dad, very like rare, I think, in mass media at the time, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s. And like just the sort of osmosis effect of having relationships with Black characters through your television set as a white person. I think just seeing those people and those like being a presence in your world affects how you treat people in your everyday life.
This is why historically, when you go back to the 50s during Amos and Andy, and why the NAACP lobbied to get that show off the air, because of the representations they were putting on television about Black people. It took years for that to go away. But you think about it, it didn't really, because you realize Cicely Tyson was on a show, I think it was in the 60s, I think it was called The Lawyers. She was on that show and she wore her hair natural, little short afro. Guess who gave her hell about it though? The NAACP. Because she was wearing her hair natural. And then you have to move forward to Julia in the late 60s, early 70s with Diane Carroll. Here's a single Black mother as a nurse. And then you move forward, and then you hit the Norman Lear era, where we've got Good Times, but we also have the Jeffersons. George Jefferson's actually owning his own business. It took all these tiny little steps. That's what brought us to shows like The Cosby Show and The Different World, because none of this stuff, nobody ever seen this type of stuff before, especially like The Different World when Black people going to college. You know, people are thinking about, you know, college was like Animal House.
Eating, stuff like that.
Stuff like that.
Normalize normal Black people.
Yeah. And so this is all this stuff. It's been coming down the pike for years. And it's the same thing with athletics, same thing with definitely in music, in art. I mean, you think about Basquiat, for crying out loud.
People didn't know he was black till now. Beethoven was black too, I think, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I think I want to go back, like, normalize normal Black people. I want to say, like, I want to go a step further for this program, is like normalize normal Black people with diabetes.
Yeah.
Like, with no family history, with no other, pre-existing conditions. Why not? Everybody else, we accept everybody else. Sorry, say that again, Taylor.
No, I was gonna say, or before we're like dying, period, or having some kind of awful complications. Because I think something I notice, and it drives me crazy about the diabetes community, is that even when we're like marginally represented, we're shown in a stereotype. We're a super buff athlete. Like, I just want to see like a fluffy Black man. Like, why is that so hard? Like, why don't I see more fluffy Black guys? They don't, because they can't look diabetic. So they have to be big athletes who work out 12 times a week. You don't see, you see very few like normal sized Black women. Like, everyone is either super tiny, again, an athlete. You have to be ultra feminine, sing, dance, cook. Like, why do we always have to dance for white people? Why? Why is our not just having diabetes enough? Because it doesn't seem to be.
So I think it's a good question. And I as we kind of sort of come to the end of our time together tonight, let's have that discussion. Why isn't it enough? Why do Black people with diabetes have to dance?
I don't think that it's enough because they want us. It's not, I don't know. It's not interesting enough for white people to watch us just be Black. Like, it's like, oh, I don't see myself, so this isn't fun. This isn't interesting anymore. I no longer want to pay attention.
I also think there's this like perception, especially like I never felt this when I was like labeled type 2, but I feel this like very often now, that you have to be just like this extraordinary person with type 1, because it's like you have to fly to the moon and be able to dunk on people and like just have all these special abilities, because it takes that stigma off of you that like you're not limited by your illness. And I think a lot of us talk about, and it's hard to say that, and no knock Mary and do extraordinary things and that being a part of their lives. But I think like oftentimes it's again that discomfort, like people don't want to see someone with complications, and then like God forbid you're Black with complications. It's like you are just such a sad story and a downer, and like I don't want to talk about it. And that is so unfair, because it misrepresents, I think, people in the community. And I think that's just it. Like, and there's this really interesting conversation. I try to stay away from Twitter because it gets a little
I was going to say this, bring up the same thing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
This disability conversation.
Yeah, there was a great conversation about disabilities, and someone who essentially said like, well, I don't feel limited at all by my diabetes, and I can do anything that I want, and there's nothing that holds me back. And then this kind of like other side of the coin where people were like, oh no, like because I have to think about what I eat at every meal, because I can't like join the army, or I can't like fly a plane, or like all of these things came up, and like some very extreme things and some very like common things. But it was kind of like the person who was like really adamant that diabetes didn't limit them in anything did not want to hear that people feel like they could be labeled as disabled for having diabetes, but also that it can limit parts of your life and can limit like some of the enjoyment in your life. And I think that that's just kind of like, I think why when we show up in the world and we're imperfect, or we're not musicians or dancers or something that's like entertaining to people, it's uncomfortable for them, because they don't have something that they feel like keeps their attention. And they feel like that story is too sad to listen to, even though it's just as valuable of a story as somebody who is all of those things.
Yeah, it goes back to the question about media, right? So because Black people are always portrayed as athletes or entertainers or super ratchet or whatever the case may be, like, again, if we're not dancing or entertaining or playing sports or super ratchet, if we're just normal Black people,
He said twerking.
it's not exciting enough. And that's why it feels like we always need to be extraordinary and oftentimes dancing.
It's really interesting when you see extraordinary people. I'm sorry to step on you there, Taylor. Like, it happens with extraordinary people too. Like LeBron James and Colin Kaepernick, I think, are peak examples of when the minute they start to dedicate any time, energy, money to something other than sports, everybody comes out of the woodwork like, shut up and dribble. And I mean, like the sitting president of the country tweeting nasty things about these people.
I mean, imagine being a Black woman, Serena Williams. I mean, you say LeBron, you
The
say
GOAT.
Colin Kaepernick, but like then we talk about people who are legitimately the best. Like this person is incredible. Like this is so like outperforms anyone, and y'all still talk shit on her. So it's like,
Yeah, and then remember, she almost died. She almost died because doctors didn't take her seriously. She's rich, she's successful, she's someone who is in peak shape. And when she was like, something is wrong with my body, no one listened. Yeah. And that for me is being a Black woman in America. Like
comfortable Black people back.
I'm always uncomfortable.
Your mama back. I can be comfortable. Stop making all this noise. Stop crying. Stop all this marching and stop all this, acting like you're uncomfortable because I didn't do it. My ancestors did it.
I mean, honestly, at this point, it's the question of, because, and I've said this on a few of the other panels, and I do say this to Raul all the time too, but it's like most of the people who listen to us and our audience it's a lot of white people. So if for the ones that are listening to this, like, what is the takeaway for them? What is something that you want to make sure, like, that you said today that they get from this? Because while I know that white people can do their own research, I think that stories and people's experience are so valuable. So if you could, everyone, just maybe tell me what you want them to take away from this. Chelsea, you can go first. I love your take on everything, man.
I got to hang out with Chelsea more often. That's my takeaway from this.
Yeah, I mean, what I would like, something just simple. Listen. All you got to do is listen. Because the more you listen, a lot of it's going to start to make sense. And understand that much of what you know has been a lie. Not your fault, because their systems have been created to keep you from understanding these hurdles that have been placed to prevent people of color from advancing in this country. So you need to understand that when we scream owl, we are not crying wolf, because we're actually screaming owl because my mother and father screamed owl and you didn't listen to them. My grandfather and grandmother screamed owl, you didn't listen to them. So I'm still screaming owl because nobody listened to them. Now I need you to listen to me. So all you have to do is listen. And like I always say, you may not listen to me, but you will hear me, because I'm not going to stop talking and I'm not going to stop making noise. And that's one of the things that we need to do as a community, is we need to start putting the information online, but also we need to get out in the streets and go old school. Okay, we need some Fred Hamptons, we need some Bobby Seals, we need some Angela Davises to get in the streets and get back out there in people's faces and start having these conversations with our own people to get us all empowered. All of us got empowered for some reason or another, somehow or another. And so we need to go ahead and pass that torch, pass that baton to other folks. There's kids out there that don't even realize that they either have diabetes or they may have it and don't know where to turn to because their parents may not have the education. So those folks need to be talked to and they need to be empowered. And so as far as like it's takeaways, all you got to do is stop talking about how you feel and start listening.
It's such a hard question also, because like on one hand, like it's not our jobs to get people to do the work that they should be doing. But on the other hand, we also have to, because some people don't do the work. So I think from my perspective, I think examining your biases and understanding more about why and when they happen, and like getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So like if you're sitting in a room full of white people and they're making a decision that affects the lives of Black and brown people, maybe be the first person to raise your hand and ask, like, did we ask this community what they wanted? Did we ask them what they thought? Did we get insight as to whether or not this is the right thing to do? Or is this like a savior complex thing because we feel like we have power so we can do something about it? I know like a lot of my like other blogger friends didn't necessarily like think that way or ask those questions. And so they would get invited to an event and they would like share pictures from after. And I would be the first person to be like, you know, everybody in that photo is white, right? Like, you didn't think to ask me if I wanted to come or ask who's all gonna be there. Like, you just were like, oh, let me go and let me take pictures and like, let it look homogenous. And so I think like having that like switch in your mind, and that develops over time. Like, that's not something that happens overnight, but figuring out like when those moments do happen and knowing that like you as a person with some privilege because of your skin color can be the first person to kind of stand up and say like, hey, that something is wrong with this picture. And it doesn't have to be like, you know, standing on the table and saying it in front of everybody. It can be something that like, if you have proximity to power, talk to someone about it and say something about it. But I think that's a major first step, is just acknowledging it and making other people aware, because I think it happens like way more often than we think without people even thinking that there's a problem. And it may just be where you are, so you think it's normal, but it's good to reflect and remember that like a room like that or a place like that is not normal. And you have to think about what you can do to change that, to ensure that there are more people at the table and more voices in the room.
I think, oh man. Yeah, it is a really hard question. I think that the thing that I would ask is for people to care about more than just themselves, to love others as yourself, right? So if you love others as yourself, like, you're going to listen to them when they have concerns or gripes, or just talking about their personal experience with diabetes and the things that they've dealt with their diagnosis or with their healthcare providers, or having access to the supplies and the insulin that they need, whatever. You're going to listen to that. You're going to look for ways to help them. If you care about others more than yourself, when you are invited to speak on a panel or to attend a conference or be in a position of power, you're going to look for other people who weren't invited and bring them along because you care about them and you want them to have the same or similar experiences as you. If you care about other people more than yourself, you're going to go out of your way to try and make sure that things are equitable. You're not going to just sit back and be like, yep, I'm chilling. This is great for me. Sucks for y'all. You're going to do what you can to improve, you know, the experiences of other people who don't have the same privileges as you. So yeah, it's love others as yourself, because we know that you can love yourself. You've been doing that for a while.
So people ask me this a solid bit because I rant about white people on Instagram a lot. So this is a question people ask me all the time. And the only answer I have is an uninformed ally isn't an ally at all. You don't help anyone if you are uneducated and just kind of strapping on your like white savior vest and hopping in, and you don't know what you're talking about, and you haven't been listening, and you haven't been learning. Chelsea said it really well earlier. Most of us are dealing with intergenerational trauma and issues that have come down from our parents and our parents' parents, and we're fighting those systems. And if you have no concept of what it is we're fighting against, you can't help us fight it. And a lot of times what I see is people with really good intentions who are trying to be really sweet and be really helpful are reinforcing stereotypes. They're continuing to like perpetuate narratives that hurt us. So I think before or in the process of trying to do things, make sure you know the history, make sure you're informed about the issues, They're easy things you can do to learn. I don't think you need to go do like a deep dive through any kind of academic archives if you don't want to, if that's not your thing. But follow Black people, like make sure that you're surrounded by a variety of Black voices. Consume Black media other than rap music. Like Black is just fun. It occasionally has great life lessons. Like watch things like that. It's not hard to inform yourself. So at least start from there, because it's not helpful when you're just like Black people are poor and that's why they're all dying. I think that's not it.
Thinking about some of the stuff that like I see happen to Taylor, and one of the things that I saw that just like made me infinitely angry was when somebody basically took what she did and her words and like reposted it on their own profile for clout instead of amplifying her voice and saying like, this is where I learned this is where I got this is a person that you need to listen to when it comes to issues like this. And I just like, I don't know, I wish like all the wrath upon them, because I was like, why would you take somebody's like lived experience and then like post this as a white person and act like you know everything? And like, it's okay to share what you learn. It's okay to share what you think you know or what you do know, but it's not okay to take someone else's sentiment and somebody else's words and post them basically because you want to get likes on Instagram. So
she really took her stuff, right? Like, didn't she crop your name out of it, girl? Like, wasn't it bad? Like, she really thought your life was a meme.
Yeah, there've been a few. We're very convenient props sometimes for people.
Colonization takes many forms.
It really does. Instagram is like, God, the like new forms of colonization on that app. I swear to God, like
the cap on this app.
The cap on that app. So yeah, that to me is like another very important one. It's like amplify people of color, and even if you have a larger platform or a larger voice, it takes $0 and zero time to tag the person that you got the idea from and give the credit where the credit is due and let people learn from a reliable source. But that's a different conversation for a different day.
Can I change my TLDR? I can change my TLDR to move, bitch, get out the way. Taylor, whenever that did happen, did that person apologize? How did that go down? Did they apologize to you, or did they just take it down, or what?
I think they may have just archived the post, as far as I know. Then someone got more creative about it than just went and like high-key copied and pasted like responses from the medical guide that I posted, or like things from the study, and I was just like, okay. Like, it's not worth it to me to argue with somebody about it. I'm just like, okay.
It's not worth it to you, but I have time. So please.
I was about to say, run me the at. Run me the at, because I think you already did. I think you've already run me this at before. That's why I'm saying that. But yeah, it drives me crazy, this stuff. This is just another example of, it's just white stuff. Like, they take credit for things that we do, and it's just mind-blowing, mind-boggling. I'm glad you guys brought it up. Wow.
Yeah, but also like the double standard in our reaction too, because I know, Taylor, like if you were to like read these people for filth, like they would be like, well, she's an awful, rude person, and she's not collaborative, and she's mean, and she is this, and this, and this, and no one would ever think like, well, she's defending her work and she is standing up for herself in a situation that deserves standing up for. And so I think that that's also a difficult part of it, is like, as much as this stuff can happen, and, you know, like all of us are willing to come to your side at like any time at any moment, the perception of what defending yourself in a community that is hostile to you at times is also just like another kind of like aside to it. It's like, is it even worth my time and my energy to like fight for myself, because people aren't going to take it out for you anyway.
All my life I had to fight. All my life
labeled as mean as angry, like constantly. That's the message I get. You're so negative, you're so mean, I'm so angry. And I'm like, no, I just want you to know what you're talking about, because I truly believe we could be better, but you're choosing not to be. And it's a problem.
And I think it's a bigger issue. Like my advice would be, believe Black women and protect Black women, because that, you know, the things that people say to Black women, they don't say to white women. And the labels that are associated, difficult, angry, combative, are quickly thrown. And I think Chelsea said it earlier, you can't call somebody a racist because immediately their response is, I'm not racist. And I mean, even on we were talking about the JDRF posts earlier, these like very blatantly printed, posted public racist comments were like, I'm not racist. You guys are crazy. Look at you attacking me. All these people are coming out of the woodwork attacking me. That like doom loop of those things continuing to happen.
There's something else you may want to keep an eye out too. Sort of like the saying goes, your skin folk ain't your kinfolk. There's folks in the diabetes online community that ain't exactly allies, and they are out there undermining much of what we're doing. So keep your eyes and ears open, because they're gonna smile in your face, but at the same time, they don't have your back. Because I'm looking, as far as like whether it, white folks or black folks, anybody is willing to work with us. Most folks are looking for allies. I'm looking for accomplices. Okay, because an ally will pat you on the back and let you walk into a burning building by yourself, but an accomplice is gonna go in there with me. So that's what I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you guys all for your time today, for your effort, for discussing things I think that are difficult, very heavy, and sharing that with us today. I appreciate you all, and I appreciate you being part of More Than a Diabetic. Thank you for listening to More Than a Diabetic on Diabetics Doing Things. We are going to continue this 4-part series all the way through January 2021. You can find all of the content that we posted about More Than a Diabetic on diabeticsdoingthings.com/more than a diabetic with dashes in between each word. So more dash than dash a dash diabetic. And on Instagram, you can use hashtag more than a diabetic and see all of the little micro content that we're putting out there, all of the individual show graphics, and all of the Instagram handles of our amazing guests. So keep it locked for more than a diabetic here on Diabetics Doing Things.